would like to go ahead and get this evening started, and we're obviously here to learn about the future, not as a fortune telling, but as in a use of scientific methods to project some of the changes we can expect over the next couple of decades. From my understanding and Googling tonight's speaker, the pace of change is going to accelerate between now and 2040. So let's go ahead and get the program started. And to introduce our speaker is Mr. David Clement, our Executive Director of the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions. Good evening.
Thank you, Mark. And let me add my welcome to all of you. It's great to see such a great turnout for this program. Obviously, there's a great deal of interest in learning what's in store for us in the next couple of decades. If you're anything like me, you dislike change. If I could go along with my life just as it is, I would probably be quite happy. But of course I can't. None of us can. As George Bernard Shaw said, progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. So I accept change, for it is constant in the world, and generally, most of us deal with it as fine as long as it isn't too drastic and too major. Well, based on my research and talking with the speaker, we're in for a rough ride with the change that's coming in the next couple of decades. He says there will be more disruption than any similar period in history, and that includes the Industrial Revolution and the Information Age. Wow. I'm not sure I want to think about that, but I should, you should, and that's why I invited David Houle to bring his message of change. The term he uses for it is shift to St. Petersburg College. Mr. Houle is the futurist in residence and guest lecturer at the Ringling College of Art and Design in Sarasota. He has been called the CEO's futurist and America's leading futurist, having delivered over 700 keynote and presentations in 13 countries. He's the author of 7 books, which are listed in your program, and is honorary president and futurist of, get this, the Future Business School of China. Read the rest of his most impressive bio in your program as you welcome to the stage Mr. David Houle.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Thank you. Everything you said is true. I'm done. No, I am a futurist, and I define that as being a catalyst to get people, companies, markets in the world to think about the future and to facilitate a conversation about it. So the good news is we're going to have an hour to interact. Usually I get up and I am speaking for an hour, take 15 minutes of questions, and then leave. And so I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have, I think, close to an hour for Q&A. And I have to immediately leave right at 8 o'clock because I have to catch a flight to give a speech tomorrow in Chicago. So the way I want you to hold this presentation is change is uncomfortable. Obviously, it's my job, therefore, to give you the conceptual framework and the contexts to place this change that may be disorienting to you. Because the only constant in the universe is change. So anytime you hold a fixed position or point of view, or you want to hold on to some reality, something is going to happen that you won't see because you're busy holding on, okay? So hopefully by the end of this evening's program, you'll have ways to kind of go, oh, I understand that because, yeah, he said that. Right? So my job here is to help you loosen up your sense of the future. To repeat what David said, the next 20 years, reality will change. And so what does that mean? It means that when reality changes, meaning changes, all definitions of life can change, literally. And I truly think that this next 20 years will have more change than any other 50 or 75-year period in human history. So I've called it shift transformation. Let me give you some dictionary definitions. I'm also, as I will say in a minute, I'm the futurist who said we've left the information age and entered the shift age. So the dictionary definition of shift, to put something aside and replace it with another or others, change or exchange. So that's what shift means. That's what's going on in the world. The second dictionary definition of transformation, a change in form, appearance, nature, or character. So, for example, I spoke this past weekend to an international education conference, and I was saying education in the 21st century is going to change its nature, shape, character, and form, and everything's going to shift and get replaced. This is the best quote of the future, about the future, I've ever seen. It was the quote I put in my first book 10 years ago called The Shift Age. We should try to be the parents of our future rather than the offspring of our past. So we need to give birth to the future rather than to hold on to the past. Now, I stand in front of you with three primary, although there's lots of people that I've read, but three primary futurists are Buckminster Fuller, Marshall McLuhan, and Alvin Toffler. And this quote is from Toffler. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. That's what the future is about, particularly in the United States of America. Now, I'm an aging baby boomer. There's a lot of us in the room here. And when I graduated from college, our parents, by the way, had one job pretty much their whole lifetime, right? So when I graduated from college, the commencement speakers of the day said, you might have 2 or 3 jobs in your lifetime. Well, now commencement speakers are saying, graduates, you might have 3 to 5 careers in your lifetime, 2 of which, or 3 of which, have yet to be invented. So that's why we have moved from a knowledge society to a learning society. So now, we are the latest iteration of humanity called modern humanity. We've been around for about 150,000 years. And then 10,000 years ago, we literally put down roots and started the agricultural age. And this is when the concept of place took hold, because we stayed in one place rather than were nomadic. Then 300 years ago, invention of the steam engine, the industrial age began. And then in the 70s, the information age began. And then the shift age, which I am saying started about 10 years ago. So what is this shift age? I had this transformative, I was always doing stuff last century that people said wouldn't work, like launching CNN and launching MTV and creating online courses. Oh, that'll never work. Who needs a 24-hour news channel? Video music, what are you talking about? And I realized that my highest value was to do this, was to talk about what was going to happen in the future. So I had a transformative experience in Berkeley when I was giving a talk. I came back and I was thinking literally in Sarasota, I was writing started to write my first book, and I said, so wait a minute, from the vantage point of 2005, what has happened since the early 70s when the information age got its name? And there were 6 things: end of the Cold War, beginning of the global economy, personal computing, the internet, wireless, high-speed cellular connectivity, and analog to digital. Just those 6 things meant that we were going to enter a new age. Any 2 or 3 of them would mean we were going to enter a new age. So what was I going to call the new age? And I called it the shift age, because I felt that almost every aspect of humanity would undergo some extreme amount of change or shift. Unlike the prior ages, which were named after products, agricultural project, industrial project, information project. And then I said, well, if it's a new age, all ages have unique characteristics, components, forces. So what are the forces or flows of this shift age that was about to happen? This is 2005, 2006. I was researching and doing all this thinking. And I got it down to 3. And I think if you reflect on these 3 things I'm going to put up on this slide, they underpin almost every aspect of change that you have experienced in your life, at least in the last 10 years. First of all, the flow to global. Obviously, we're in a global economy. But think of the word global. 20 years ago, it was overseas, international, foreign. Now it's global. So we're in a global economy, and we're shaping ourselves in a global construct. But much more significantly than that, we are in the global stage of human evolution. We've gone from family to tribe to village to city-state to nation-state. And our only remaining boundaries for now are planetary. So we are in the global stage of human evolution. At the same time, we're getting organized as a global connected species is the flow to the individual. Every individual in this room is more powerful than individuals have ever been before. And the reason that happened was in the last quarter century of the 20th century, there was an explosion of choice. And when there's an explosion of choice, the power moves from the producer to the consumer, from the institution to the individual. So we as individuals have more power. That is the source, the genesis of video on demand. I want to watch what I want to watch, when I want to watch it, on the screen I want to watch. So those of you who are aging baby boomers, if you can remember going to the grocery store, say with your mom when you were a young kid, and you went down an aisle, and maybe there was from that barrier to here, cereal, 10 shelf feet of cereal. Now you go to a Publix, and there's a whole aisle of cereal. You know, oh, I got 13 kinds of Cheerios I can choose from, right? So when that happens, it comes to me. I get to choose. So we're getting organized around all of us and each of us, and both of these flows are amplified by the single most powerful force at play in the world today, the accelerated electronic connectedness of the planet. We're getting ever more connected. 7.5 billion people in the world, and out of 7.5 billion, 6.2 billion have cell phones. So statistically, there are more people who have cell phones than indoor plumbing and indoor electricity. And those of you that have traveled to third world countries, you know that. You've seen it. And now, of that, it was only this year that it got to various reports. I say 3 billion have smartphones, right? So the thing about this is, so I know David, and I know David's cell phone. I called it a couple of times because I was running late and was wondering where the hell I am, right? So David's 10 feet away from me now. So if I call you, David, on the cell phone, you know, 1, 1000, 2, 1000, 3, 1004, 5 seconds, David's phone would ring, right? If I called somebody I work with in China, 15,000 miles away, maybe another 2 seconds because of the relay of the satellite. So what cell phone ubiquity means is the difference between 10 feet and 15,000 miles is 2 seconds. So there's no time or distance that limits human communication. You couldn't say that 10 years ago, let alone 25 or 50. There's no time or distance limiting human communication. Now, question to the room. If you're on a cell phone, to cell phone conversation, so you know that the other person's on a cell phone, after, hey, can you hear me now? Can you hear me okay? You know, how you doing? What's the next question you ask cell phone to cell phone conversation usually? What? Where are you? Right. So there's no time, distance, or place limiting human communication. Place is irrelevant to communication for the first time in human history. As recently as 25 years ago, you had a phone plugged into the place of work, plugged into the place of home, and in between was a voice message system. Now there's no time, distance, or place limiting human communication. That's a profound fact. And it has only existed since about 2010. Now, remember 1999? What are you going to do New Year's Eve, New Millennium? Well, it wasn't the New Millennium, right? The New Millennium was 2000, 2001, but because we're so odometer-oriented in this country, right? 1999. We thought it was. Same thing happened in December 2009. I can remember I was writing my second book in a condo in Sarasota, and I'd take a break from writing, and I'd go to mainstream TV, and what's this next decade going to be called? And of course, the thought balloon over my head is, it's not the new decade, that's 2010 to 2020, but since I'm a futurist and I want to get ahead of the parade, on Friday, January 1st, 2010, 01/01/10, interesting digital date, I called it the transformation decade. and it blew up in the blogosphere and Twitter, more than almost any other column. And people in 43 countries read my blog. And so I felt very smug and self-satisfied that whole weekend, because it was a Friday. I came up with a good name. But what I didn't realize was that ultimately, this became one of the most profound things I'd come up with, particularly when I was speaking to all those CEOs mentioned. I've spoken to like almost 4,000 CEOs, advised them, or corporate retreats. Here's again the dictionary definition of transformation: a change in form, appearance, nature, or character. So I would say to CEOs in 2010, 2011, 2012, Madam CEO, Mr. CEO, if you're not in the business of changing the nature, shape, character, and form of your business, you may not have one by 2020. And that really was a resonance. And it's proved to be true. I mean, you can think about a lot of companies that are going out, retail. I called 2010, I said that physical retail will collapse in this decade. It will be the most transformative decade of physical retail since the beginning of the automobile. And I was right. And I'll talk about that in a sec. So with change, there's a collapse of legacy thinking. As a futurist, this is what I see when I travel the world. Everywhere, thinking is collapsing. I don't mean legacy as in the great legacy he or she left us. I mean in the legacy thinking of Dad always said, or my business mentor in 1993 told me to always, if you haven't checked those two truisms relative to what's going on in 2017, you may not be seeing 2017 clearly. So legacy thinking is collapsing. Now, when something collapses, it opens up a space, right? And that space is this, 21st century thought. This is the decade where humanity is thinking 21st century thought for the first time. We collectively, certainly the United States of America, absolutely Washington, D.C., has powered into the 21st century, seeing it through 20th century thought, 20th century constructs. Remember those six things that I said ushered in the shift age? So when people talk about, well, back in Ronald Reagan's day, Cold War, no global economy, no, right? So it's kind of like, this is a 20th century building, right? And yet we have to have the students here think 21st century thought. So this is the first decade of 20th century thought. I think future historians, say 2100, will look back and go, this is when humanity started to think 21st century thought. So when I talk to education conferences, I say, what does 21st century education look like? Healthcare conferences, because I wrote a book on the future of healthcare. What does healthcare in 21st century look like? Fill in the blank. If I say 20th century to you, 20th century, century of World War, American century, century of science, it truly began 1914 to 1918. First industrialized war, Russian Revolution, socialism, communism, general theory of relativity, the map of Europe as we know it. It very unfortunately in 1918, 1919, the map of the Middle East as the French and the English arbitrarily defined it with these arbitrary direct straight lines and right angles in the Middle East. So all the storylines of the last 100 years began in the second decade of the 20th century. That's what's going to happen in this century. So now, I got it down to three forces. And some of you may remember the classic line, cliche that's true, content is king. That was the information age. Shift age, context is king. The context through which you receive the information shapes the information as much as the information. If you're watching a story about Washington, D.C., here are the numbers, and you're watching it on MSNBC, that's an entirely different context than if you're watching on Fox News. Same numbers, completely different context, completely different decision, right? So we live in a contextual world. So I thought when I wrote Entering the Shift Age in 2012, what are the least number of contexts that I can come up with through which most of the future of humanity will be seen? And I got it down to 5, and I'm going to go real quickly here. First of all, the Earth century. This is the century where we, humanity, have to finally come to terms with our moral, ethical, and sustainable relationship to the only place we live, which is the Earth. So everything will be much more oriented towards that. I'll talk about that later in a minute. Retrofitting the 20th century. We are the first iteration of humanity that has to go back and change history. right? If I was standing here, theoretically, in 1800 on New Year's Day, and I'd look around, there might be some people, indigenous people. I look around and, and there's horses and stuff. 1900, oh, look, a train. 20th century, 2000, we've paved the planet. Towers of all sorts, airplanes, cars. So we have created, there's no go west, young man, the way you could. We're overpopulated, and everything's been paved. 3% of the total landmass of the United States are roads in terms of amount of land. So we have to go back and change it. The other thing that happened in the 20th century is humanity quadrupled its population from 1.5 billion to 6 billion. It took 150,000 years to get to 1 billion, and in 100 years we went from 1.5 to 6. So we've paved the planet and we've fully populated it. The concept of place has changed forever. No time, distance, or place limiting human communication. We live in a spatial world. When I grew up, I learned about what was happening in China 3 days later. Now I get a beep on my phone when there's something going on. We are in a spatial context now because we're all connected. Biology and technology merge. And if I was standing in front of you in 2000, if I said biology, it would be nature, technology would be human. Now, I'm sure there's implants or hip replacements or knee replacements in this room, and soon we're going to have chips in our brain. So, and also there's biological computer chips. So that is being merged. And lastly, and this was the thing that really started me, my blog, Evolution Shift, I believe that by the end of the shift age, in the 2030s, if we navigate the next 20 years as best we can, we will start to evolve into a higher level of connected consciousness. So this is not just a whole lot of change. It is a historical change in the history of our species and the planet. So technology, I'm just going to go through these real fast because we'll do Q&A. So when I go through this, I'm not going to spend that much time on it. If one of these things you want to ask a question around, jot it down. First of all, artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things, and big data. This, in the aggregate, I call the age of intelligence. And all of this in the aggregate is the greatest technological innovation since electricity in terms of how it will change how human society, economics, and marketplace and self-definition is. Touch, voice, brain, wave interface. So first there was touch, right? Oh, I touch. Now it's voice, Siri, Alexa, and it's soon brainwave. In research labs around the world, there is successful brainwave computer interface. They're putting on things that measure the brainwaves. And so now we can think and tell the computer what to do. If you take that to its logical conclusion, then you'll understand what I'm talking about a change in consciousness and evolution. Because if we're spending 10 to 15 years learning how to mind-direct computers, it doesn't take much belief to lift off that we can do it with each other, right? So, electric cars, autonomous automobiles. By 2030, my estimate is that 75 to 80% of all cars on the road in the United States of America will either be EV, electrical vehicles, plug-ins, or hybrids, and that 30% or more will be driverless automobiles, driverless cars. And there's a whole lot of beauty in that, and there's a whole lot of problems that solves. And for anybody who's nervous about it, ask me a question about it, we can talk about it. DNA medicine, DNA hacking, transhumanism, treating aging as a disease. DNA medicine, the ability to treat cancer on a human-by-human basis. Rather than degrading the whole body through chemo, you take the cancer drug, match it with the DNA, inject it right into the tumor to make the tumor go away. DNA hacking. They just did something about 2 months ago. Frozen sperm, frozen egg. The egg had a genetic pass-through of Parkinson's, and they went in and altered the DNA so that when the sperm and egg got together, they would have eliminated a genetic pass-on disease. That is happening now, okay? Transhumanism is the empowering of humans, like cyborgs, or planting of chips inside the brain. And treating aging as a disease, which about that, okay? In 1900, the average lifespan of an American was 47. In 2000, it was 78. That's a 75% increase. You take 78 times 1.75, and you're at 125 by the end of this. That's just normal progression. But as Ray Kurzweil says, if you can live to 2025, you'll be able to live forever. Because we have a new consciousness about aging. Oh, isn't it sad she passed away? She was getting old. We solved polio. We solved malaria. So now if we start thinking of the single biggest thing that kills humans, it's not a disease, old age, start treating it as a disease. I mean, I'm doing it's called life extension with doing all kinds of different things. All the research there is, as I say to people, if you're under the age of 40, stay in great shape, do all the right things, because you might be able to live to be 150. And I mean that seriously. But don't think that, I'm going to be old for longer. It just slows down the aging through life. So machine learning. Here's the definition of machine learning. The ability of a machine to improve its performance based on previous results. So what I want to say about that is I took out the slide about artificial intelligence and the definitions. I got really angry about a year ago when I couldn't get away with this stupid conversation about artificial intelligence. Oh, the machines are going to take over. Terminator 3, we're going to have robotic overlords. Give me a break. So I looked up the definition of intelligence. Nowhere in the definition of intelligence is the word human. Right? I mean, dolphins have intelligence. Whales have intelligence. I'm sure somebody in this room has said, my dog's really intelligent. Right? So why are we calling it artificial, right? I looked up the word artificial. It says man-made. Yeah, we made the computer and we did the algorithms, but now machine learning is on its own. If somebody wants to ask me a question, because I want to make sure to get through the questions, I'd like to go deeper into this to explain this. This is truly significant. Oxford University, the most cited study, 2013, 47% of all the jobs in America will be gone by 2030 because of this. So 2017 to 2037, reality as we know it will change. So don't say to me in any Q&A, well, but the reality is, yeah, that's right, is not will be, right? So, and here's the quote. You have this choice. The older you are in this room, the more you can embrace this. If we choose, we can live in a life of comforting illusion. We can. You can just play golf, and as a parenthetical side, I was driving here. I don't know if any of you listen to Sirius Radio, but there's a comedy channel, and my favorite is George Carlin, right? And he was saying, we shouldn't call them the homeless. We should call them the houseless. They don't have houses, but not in my backyard here. You know what we do? We put all the homeless on golf courses, right? But if your comforting reality is you like to play golf and do that, you don't want to do it. But the point is, sorry for that aside, but it just hit home. Because I've been saying for years that the only thing remaining that's green in golf courses are going to be the greens. But this is true. You have this option, but it is an illusion. And sometimes illusions get shattered. And if you're living in an illusory state and you're forced to wake up, you're in total reactive mode. That's what this evening is hoped to be an antidote in preparation so that won't happen. So what's going to happen? I'm going to go through this real quickly. Write down the ones that or make a mental note of the ones you want to ask. We're going to have to reinvent democracy and capitalism. They're both 225 years old. Adam Smith died in 1790. The French Revolution, the American Revolution. So they were invented about 225 years ago when there were 680 million people on the planet, most of which didn't partake of that. Now there's 7.5 billion and most of them are. And name a democracy that's working. Name a democracy that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Name a democracy that isn't corrupted by money. And I'd be really interested to hear that. And also, we are the longest running democracy in the world, and we're the only democracy with a two-party system. John Adams, beware of the power of political parties to corrupt a democracy. Go look at the news. Beginning of the end of the nation state. I've been saying this since the beginning. Global stage of human evolution. Almost every single problem we have as humanity today cannot be solved by a nation state. America can't solve climate change. Canada can't solve wealth inequality. So we're moving to a global, by the end of this century, there will be nation states, but there'll be much more about keeping the trains on time and preserving the culture and the manners of the country. Major economic reorganization, huge coming, right? One of the reasons that capitalism isn't working is that, by the way, it was on Sunday was the anniversary of the stock market crash in 1929, and wealth inequality in the United States of America today is the greatest it's ever been since that day. Okay, so we're gonna have to reorganize. It's not working. We're creating a permanent underclass in this country. Social upheaval and redefinition, similar to that, and definition of life. Right? If we can create life, if we can clone a goat, if we can clone a horse, if we can take out Parkinson's by DNA hacking in vitro, what is life? What does life mean? Is a cyborg alive? Anybody into Blade Runner the way I am, 2049? The whole concept of that was that a replicant and a human created an offspring. Is that a live person? Don't know. The Spaceship Earth. This is my 7th book. I wrote it with Tim Rummage, head of environmental studies of Ringling. And so I said to Tim, I want to write a book on climate change. And because he was an academic, it took 2 years to write the book. Respect to academics, most books I can write in 6 months. But 2 years I wrote it, it made me realize that it would be a dereliction of duty as a professional futurist if I didn't aggressively talk about climate change. Okay? So I not only wrote the book, I realized how serious it was. So I took off last year to set up a global-facing nonprofit headquartered in Sarasota to face climate change. Okay? This Spaceship Earth. Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. I'll let you read this one yourselves. Right? So what that means is, we all grew up in the growth economy. What's your growth going to be next year? How many increase in the incoming students you're going to have in this college? It's all about growth. Well, with 7.5 billion people on the planet, and with 25,000 people a day dying of starvation or malnutrition in this country, in the world, sorry, this is no longer working. So some of us and some of the more enlightened corporations or self-satisfied, self-righteous people are going, well, it's a circular economy. We're going to regenerate. We're going to be design-led reuse. Absolutely. That's a short transition. Here is what we have to do. We have to create the spaceship economy. Spaceship first, economy reorganized. Hold on. There we go. See, I almost got the time right. There's no clock in here, so there we go. Spaceship. The reason I called it this Spaceship Earth is because in 1969, and I have the original, I always carry with me, of R. Buckminster Fuller's book, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, 1969. He said, if we don't create an operating manual for Spaceship Earth, we will have a problem. The beauty of that, to me, was once you think of Earth as a spaceship, what do we know about spaceships? They don't get resupplied. So if you're consuming beyond the capacity of the ship, you have to abort the mission. That was 69. 1970, first Earth Day, which I attended. Hopefully some of you did as well. Marshall McLuhan said, there are no passengers in Spaceship Earth. We are all crew. So my nonprofit, for example, is to create crew consciousness on the planet. And then Fuller, in 1970, wrote a book that said utopia, it said utopia or oblivion. That that we're going to come to a fork in the road, several decades, which this futurist thinks we've passed already, utopia or oblivion. So that's why this is so significant. So the age of intelligence, the age of climate change, and moving towards a post-capitalist society are the three fundamental challenges that we, humanity, and certainly we as Americans, have to face in the next 20 years. And it is these ages that I think the next 20 years will be defined for. So thank you. And I'll leave that up if you want to write that down. That's my website. That's how to reach me. And that's the website, soon to be changed by the weekend, on the nonprofit. So am I supposed to sit down here? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Thank you, David.
That's good to see.
In the interest of getting to more questions from you all, I know you have many, as I do, we are dispensing with our usual feature at this point in the program, for those of you who are regulars, of doing instant surveys and talking about it. We want to talk with our guest speaker tonight, as much as we can and not take away from it. So I'm going to sit down with him and chat for a few minutes about a few of the points that I've studied, or I'd like for him to elaborate on, and then we're going to go straight to questions from you all. So just let me sit down for a minute. Well, you threw a lot at us, and I think some of the points could use some elaboration. So I will ask you, but first, before we get into elaboration, can I just go into a couple of nuts and bolts about how do you come up with your predictions? Sure. Right. And somebody wrote in and said, do you consider it a science? I think you do. And then how accurate have you been? What's your record on accuracy so far, if you have that?
Valid questions. I only half-jokingly say, as I said to the reporter who was here today, that I'm the most superficial intellectual grazer you'd ever want to meet, right? My job, my responsibility for you is to see all the dots, the constellation of what might happen, connect the dots and present it to you. Your job is to own what you do and do it well. So I kind of say I'm very broadly focused, and all of you are kind of siloed and vertically focused. That's one thing. Second thing is that I look back at my life, and I could give you 10 more examples than the two I did about helping start the cable networks and then online courses. I've always done things that then years later everybody else did. So I trusted my instinct and my intuition, combined it with the, with the wide superficial, and also picked the things that I knew well and doubled down on them, like I knew media. I happened to be right about the price of oil. When I first opened my shingle out in 2005, somebody said, so what forecasts have you made that were accurate? And I said, oh, I got to do that, right? So in 2006, I said that oil would be $125 a barrel in 2008. And right then it was $50. And I literally was laughed off a national syndicated show. Well, now we hear this Goldman Sachs guy who said, oh, it'll be about 55, 60. And of course, I was right. It went to 147. I've been right about oil. Relative to my forecasts, if you go to www.davidhoule.com, there is a bar there that says forecasts. And it says, I'm accountable to you. I have I have to update it. I've been so busy the last few months, I haven't updated it. But most of my forecasts, I've got a lot of forecasts that are kind of off the top of the head, but everything I said and when I said it. So I'm the only futurist who puts that up. Okay? So I think that's the answer to that. Right?
Good, thank you. One of the last things you referred to was the beginning of the end of the nation state.
Right.
And I can't help thinking about what we're going through right now with our archenemy, Russia. What about them and their long-range future and the pursuit that they have of what they do?
So the question's about Russia?
About Russia.
About Russia. Well, one of the things I read religiously is The Economist. Has anybody gotten a recent copy of The Economist this week? Came in the mail. It shows Putin dressed up as a czar, and it says, "A czar is born," right? We're obsessed with it because of the goddamn mainstream media, right? It is the largest country in the world. It has 7 time zones. Its population is decreasing at 3% a year and has for the last 20 years. It has not had positive GDP growth for the last 3 years. It's an oil-based economy at a time where the end of the fossil fuel age has begun. So Its sole power is the fact that it is large, the fact that Putin is an autocrat and is playing to win, and that's about it. And they have the nuclear weapons. One of the things that has always bothered me about the Clinton administration is that when we won, we acted as though we won the Cold War. We didn't win the Cold War. The Soviet Union collapsed, imploded, because of it couldn't deliver on economics, right? So what we should have done is we should have gone in. Anybody remember the Marshall Plan of the end of the World War II? We go in and rebuild our enemies so they are not our enemies. I kept saying, you know, George H.W. and then Bill Clinton, go in there, give them billions of dollars to create an entrepreneurial, get close to them, because now it's China, Russia, and us. And if we had done that work, then we wouldn't have this situation. So it is the flaw of our self-absorbed attitude of winning the Cold War that has put us in this position, I think.
We had another scholar in this room 2 years ago who said the very same thing.
Oh, really?
Bernard Cobb. He was a CBS News analyst and reporter for
Bernard
years.
Kalb?
That Cobb.
Yeah, right.
And he came here and he knows Russia. He spent many years
Right.
there. And he said that if we'd have taken that strategy back then, things would be different. Another nation state, while we're on this topic, that worries us a lot is North Korea. What is your outlook about them?
I don't really, you know, that's not, I mean, I grew up, most of the people in this grew up with mutually assured destruction, right? So, you know, I've lived all my life in the existential reality that at any point in time my life could be over because of atom bombs. So, you know, we're getting I don't see a geopolitical win there. The way I've thought about it is the only way to do it, and I don't think he has the intelligence to do it with the force that needs to be done. I've been in China several times. Sit down with President Xi and say, look, every month that you don't completely cut off North Korea, we're going to add 5% tariff to every single thing made in China that comes into this country, up to 100%. What you're going to do? That's the only way out, is to choke them so that they start to starve and they have no, right? And I can't think, it's one of the most complex geopolitical situations, but the problem, I don't have any problem with what Trump is doing, because the last 40 years have been sanctions, and they got the atom bomb, right? So sanctions didn't keep them from getting the atom bomb. So sanctions don't work because China never participated in them.
Okay, good. One of the later quotes you had in the slides was from Elon Musk, who said some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster.
Right.
Well, there's a large climate denial crowd.
No, there isn't anymore. It's only 5% of America.
Well,
And in this, I was able, in an hour of a conversation with Congressman Buchanan, to get him to switch so that he came out to stay in the Paris Peace Accord. And at that time, is there anybody here who works for the Citizens Climate Lobby? Well, you should. They're great. And they were with me, and they pulled out the statistics. This was the end of March. 70% of Americans, 70% of Floridians, and 70% of the people in this district believe that climate change is real and to a great degree created by human activity. And only 6% in this district and 5% nationwide say that climate change is a hoax. So they may speak loudly, but fortunately, you know, of course, one of them happens to be in the White House. But
well, I would like to suggest that a big part of that low percentage are in power in the conservative wing of the Republican Party.
And they're all wrong. That's the problem. They're on the wrong side of history.
But how do we, they are doing exactly that, resisting change in the face of disaster.
What we need to do in America, if we want to remain a great country, is take personal responsibility for making that happen, okay? So, yes, thank you. My organization, the Audubon Society, the Sierra Club, Greenpeace, all of us after the inauguration, when we'd have monthly meetings, the number of people were showing up were 3, 4, 5, and 6 times as last year. Because last year, oh, well, Obama has got climate change handled. This guy doesn't. I have to do something. So they're on the wrong side of history. I wrote back in 2016 that 2015 to 2017 will be looked back on by historians as being the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. It'll take 3 to 4 decades, but it's already going down. Right now, what you're seeing is the end of fossil fuel. There is 9 months of oil sitting around this world in strategic supplies and large tanker ships, right? So we could shut down all oil and natural gas production for 9 months and supply us all. So what is that but the beginning of the end of the market, right? Doesn't matter what the price is. So I'm sorry, exactly what was your question? I kind of... So the point is, it's up to us to act as crew of this spaceship, not to be ignorant passengers, and not to think it's somebody else's problem. You know, when people say to me, oh my God, this thing gets in my... I say, does it have an off button? Turn it off. I turned it off. I'm a futurist. By the way, I'm a futurist. I'm not on Facebook. Why do I want to be on Facebook? It's a waste of time, right? You know, so the point is that if we as Americans don't like where our country is going, we can't wait for somebody else to solve the problem, right? I mean, I talk to young women who, oh, I was so empowered in the Women's March. I had this conversation at Ringling. First question, did you vote? No, the march was great. Then I said, so did you talk to the women there? Oh, it was great. I said, did you ask them if they voted? Yeah, the first 3 women I talked to didn't vote. I said, why didn't they vote? She said, and this is a working mom who'd come back to college, she said, because they all thought she would win. At which point I said, wrong use of the word. They didn't think, they listened to mainstream media. And mainstream media said she was going to win, so they decided not to vote. So if you don't vote, don't show up. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, I'm sorry to go off on this, but I was at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado for a week. I'm their chosen futurist. I came out to speak to all their partners. They are doing the cutting edge stuff on renewable energy in the world. And Martin Keller is a German who came here, worked in Oak Ridge Laboratories for 10 years and came here. And he was talking to some executives. And he said, I became an American because I wanted to participate. And the only way you can participate in a democracy is to vote. And if you don't vote, then shut up and don't talk to me. And he literally said that. So yeah. So I went to the Republican congressman. He kind of knew he should meet me. I've done speeches. And, you know, call me Vern at the end of the day. I'm sitting this far away from him for an hour. And I taught him things that he didn't know. And 3 weeks later, when it was on the Monday of the Thursday that Trump says we're stepping out of the Paris Accord, his chief of staff wrote me an email, and she said, you're going to like what we're just putting out. And it was Vern Buchanan coming out saying we should stay in the Paris climate agreement, and we should understand and accept that climate change is real and figure out how to adapt economically so we can continue to grow. So I did that. You know, I'm an independent. I was for Bernie, but I sat down with Vern and converted him. So so if you sit back and complain, that's cool, but understand you're just doing that.
One of the most...
I believe that strongly as an American.
One of the most powerful concepts you just mentioned, and I want to emphasize it again, that I got from reading your stuff is Spaceship Earth. We should consider ourselves members of the crew and not passengers. Think about that concept. That means all of us must be working instead of sitting there enjoying the ride.
Right, and so what does that mean? What it means is what's happening on the planet now hasn't happened for 800,000 years. Modern humanity, as I said, has been around for 150. So we have nothing in our toolkit, let alone our DNA, to deal with what's going on. So there are no passengers in Spaceship Earth. We're all crew. So I'm into this believing that consciousness is going to change. So we set up to create crew consciousness. So how do you act as crew? I'm going to ask you, young lady. Okay. How much is your electric bill a month? $320. You got a nice big house. $320, she says. Okay. Well, I know the heating of the pools, I was going to say, but anyway, so when you get that bill for $320, you get it as a price-oriented consumer. Oh, the bill comes in, it's $320. Okay. If it's $400, you kind of go, wait a minute. Oh, that's right. It was really, really cold or really, really hot. You'll do some kind of, and then you'll pay it. Next question. How much energy do you consume in a month that you pay $320 for? You don't know. Neither did the 100 NASA scientists that I spoke to when I was invited to speak to the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. If you want to act as crew, we have something on our website called the 2% solution. The average American consumes about 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per month. So we say 2%. So next month, bring it down to 980. Do that for 6 months, and you're at 880. You probably save money too. So what has happened? You've gone from being a price-oriented consumer to a proactive, managed crew member of this spaceship Earth, because most of the energy, electricity that you are consuming comes from fossil fuels. So that's the difference between being a passive crew member, a passive passenger, and an active crew member. And we've got lots of other things that we can offer. So it's just simple things like that, right? Recycling is a no-brainer. If we're not, everybody should recycle, but how many miles per gallon do you get in a car? Do you drive an electric car? Do you drive a hybrid? Do you take a bag when you go shopping? Do you compost? Do you buy less things? I always carry an empty water bottle. There is 1,200 water bottles every second that don't get recycled in this country. The list goes on. But the point is, what we're trying to do is to make that switch. Hopefully, you'll get your bill from FPL, and you'll look at it, and you'll say, I'm going to get this down to 300. All that means is turning out a few lights, turning the TV off when you leave the room, stuff like that. So that is crew consciousness. Remember, we are consuming 1.7 planets per year. We started in 1970 with 1.1. In other words, sustainability is a meaningless word unless it's planetary. We have to operate this spaceship Earth at 1.0 or less planets per year. And that only happens, so our goal is to recruit 1 billion crew members.
All right, good. There's one topic that a number of people who registered were allowed to ask questions, and several asked similar questions when they registered regarding the future of religion, organized religion. One asked how organized religion should change to keep from dying. Another said, what is the future of organized religion? I would like to add, from my own perspective, because we had a speaker here a year ago, earlier this year, who said that the white Christian church is dying. So what is the prospect for the Christian church, especially the white Christian church? But religion in general in this shift age.
Yeah. The answer has to be framed in centuries, okay? So Gutenberg invented the movable type press first started using it in 1450. He disintermediated knowledge. It was the first time in Europe that the church did not own knowledge. And then the Enlightenment came, right? And the Renaissance and everything else. And all of a sudden, it's about humanity. And so that was the beginning of the end of organized religion, and it only continues. Baby boomers, when they were asked in their 20s, are you a member of an organized religion? 20% said no. The millennials are being asked the same question. 40% are saying no, right? So there's no question it's on the decline. Let me just frame it this way. I have no problem with people doing whatever they want to do. I'm very spiritual. I have a spiritual practice. I'm Buddhist, perhaps, if I'm more than anything else. But as a futurist, think about it. Religion is the cause of the greatest amount of deaths in the human history, number one, and it is because they're fighting about whose past is correct. Name one religion that talks about the future. They only talk about some ethereal future if you do what I'm telling you to do in this lifetime, right? So to me, organized religion is thought control, usually hierarchical, usually male-oriented, and is only about fighting about which past is the correct one. So that going forward in a time of change only has to decline. I think that there will be a new religion that will come up. I once spoke at a room like this that ended up being surprisingly evangelical. So as a futurist, I got, I was getting it, right? And I said to them, so would you accept that Jesus was the first coming? Oh, absolutely. What was Jesus? He was the only begotten Son to give us the image of what a perfect human does. Turns the other cheek, all that stuff. I said, as a futurist, I'd like you to accept this evolutionary shift that I'm suggesting, that the second coming is not somebody else kind of coming down through some made-up way, but that we, humanity, attain the Godhead, and we all act as Jesus because we're all so connected. That's the second coming. Oh, so I try to couch things in people's terms, but I personally, as I said, let me give you a spiritual operating system for the future. Okay, it's Buddhist. Buddhism, anybody here practice Buddhism or study it at all? Okay, so at the root of Buddhism is the statement that the belief in separateness is the cause of all suffering. What do organized religions do except to say you can't marry one of them, you have to marry one of ours, right? So religions are all about creating a sense of separateness, as our nation states. So the operating system of believing that we're all one is the operating system, I think, that will triumph going forward.
One more question, then I'm going to...
You need to hold the mic closer to you.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
One more question, I'm going to shift.
Good, he's going to shift.
You talked about almost 50% of the jobs existing today being gone in 20-some years.
Right.
What happens to all the millions of middle-age or late-career people whose work will be made obsolete? Will they just be throwaways like so many of the manufacturing workers and coal miners and so forth from a few decades ago and now form a huge base of malcontent Americans who make up the populist revolution?
It depends whether we want to act stupidly the way we are. You don't go into West Virginia and say coal is over. You go into West Virginia and you say, here are federal funds to retrain every single coal miner into installing solar panels. You come up with the solution before you crush people's lives by not paying attention to it. So, for example, the high-level way to think about this. Think about the older you are, the more you'll get this. You go to a conference, you go to a meeting. What's the first thing you say? Hi, my name's David. Well, my name's so-and-so. What's the next question? So what do you do? I think that there's a real probability in 40 years that we won't have to answer that question as, oh, I am this part of the cog of the economic machinery. Here's what I have to do to make a living to pay for my family. In other words, the answer would be, what is your passion that you're living out? Oh, I plant trees because I can. So what that means is we have to rethink about it. We can talk about the carbon tax. We can redistribute the wealth through tax systems to allow people. There's something that's being called the universal basic income. Some of you may have heard of it. It's being tested, right? So in other words, anybody know the name Arthur C. Clarke? Oh, sure, okay. Childhood's End, 2001 Space Odyssey. He said the goal of the future is 100% unemployment. Raise your hand if you could do it all over again, you'd do all the work at all the jobs you wanted to do, right? So why is that such a good thing, right? So, the answer is highly complex, and I view my responsibility is to get people like you to start thinking about it. because collectively, I run numbers, you can solve the math. You can solve the math. Take the carbon tax. Okay, so the Republican elders, James Baker, George Shultz, this is what I educated Congressman Buchanan on because he was not aware of it. And I told him, I said, this gives you the cover, Vern. So Baker, Shultz, and 5 others who worked in the Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Bush 1 administrations said we ought to do a carbon tax. Milton Friedman, Market Economics. $40 a ton where carbon enters the economy. So if it's extracted, $40 there per ton. If we import it from China and they don't have a carbon tax, we'll tax the amount of carbon on a tonnage basis of that ship container. So it's a simple way to solve trade and tariff conversation, right? The Republicans said in the first year, if you do this, it gets completely redistributed through the Social Security Administration. It doesn't go to anything except to Americans. So $3 billion a year, $40 a ton, gives every family of 4 in America a $2,000 check. The thinking being the cost of living is going to go up because we're taxing carbon, so this is an offset. The reality is, most of you, it will be an income. So then what will happen? A beautiful tax for the first time. Somebody will say, let's raise the tax to $50. Let's raise the tax to $80. I want to get to $5,000 a year. And so the necessary thing, getting rid of fossil fuel emissions, will be encouraged by setting a tax on it that will pay people. Then you say, okay, so that's $2,000 to $3,000 a year. If we take $300 billion out of the Defense Department, right, and redistribute that, okay, I'm not quick to do the math, but I think that's another $10,000. So now we're up to $14,000 for family of 4 for not working, right? I mean, but it needs to be that type of heavy lifting. So the thing I want to say is the way you asked the question is you took something that was the reality in the present and projected the loss of jobs as exacerbating the present situation. And what you have to do as a futurist, if you project something happening, you have to project everything else. And if we don't do the work, I mean, we're clearly not doing the work. I mean, Mitch McConnell should be leading the effort to retrain coal miners to install solar panels and get a bill passed on it, so he doesn't have to defend coal. I just thought about something about healthcare, but I'll wait for that question.
All right, let's go to the audience now, and please wait for a staff member with a microphone to come to you.
Raise your hand high.
Everybody can hear, and we are videoing, so we want the sound on the mic. And we also want to ask you to make it a question and not a statement of your opinion. Please, we'll go with this young lady first.
First thing to do is hold it close to your mouth and say your name, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Sandra Metcalf. I'm from Seminole. One of the most difficult things that I'm going through personally right now in my life is that I see a time when very, very soon, maybe by Christmas, I have to get rid of my car. How come we didn't address autos and the use of the entire stuff that makes cars clog up our cities, slow us down, destroy our serenity? Why wasn't that part of our lives looked at within the next 20 or 25 years? You talked about...
I addressed it.
Yes,
You
only addressed it, as cars where nobody was driving, or they were individual autos. It seems to me we should have a world where there are no autos at all.
So your question is specifically?
Specifically, how do we see transportation of our life and our minds changing?
So ever since I was a young man and read a lot of science fiction, I thought, well, if aliens flew over the United States at 10,000 feet and they didn't know anything about our country, they would look down at 10,000 feet and think that the car was the dominant life form, right? Because the whole landscape is based on the car. So the answer as to why that happened is that is that petroleum and Detroit worked together, and they paid off anybody who thought of a better idea, right? I mean, Thomas Edison had the first car and was electric powered. But because John D. Rockefeller scaled up petroleum more quickly, he lost. So here's the way it's going to work. Here's the way I hope it's going to work. The average American uses their car 4% a day, time-wise. So the other 96% of the time that you have a car, it's sitting in your garage depreciating, okay? And you're paying insurance on it, you're losing value every day, you have to get it fixed up, you know, it pollutes the environment. A person dies every 6 seconds on this planet due to air pollution as a result of fossil fuels, right? So, the electric car is coming down in price, and stay with me now on the future, okay? It wasn't until last year that I had the aha moment about the autonomous automobile, because the conversation about the future of transportation in this country has always been about, well, light rail, and what do we do, things that are more energy efficient. And the aha moment I got was with the knowledge and the certainty that autonomous vehicles mean that there'll be fewer cars on the road. We have the infrastructure for the 21st century for transportation. It's called the interstate highway system, but with anywhere, my prediction is 50% fewer cars on the highway in 20 years. So if we had 50% fewer cars, we wouldn't have, think about the word, what's it called, drive time, what's it called, rush hour. It's not rush hour, it's stop and go hour, right? It's the greatest, you know. So the point is that imagine living in the neighborhood you're living. 50 houses, 100 houses. Each house has 1, 2, or 3 vehicles, most of which sit around. If there was a 24-hour autonomous automobile that knew when it needed to get charged, it would go and get charged and come up, that 50, say, house with community with between 100 and 150 cars might only need to have 25 cars. Runs around, picks up kids and school, boom, and it's always going. So, you know, the average age of getting a driver's license in America today is older than it's ever been. It's over 18 and a half years old. And an increasing number of millennials aren't even bothered getting it, going, I live in New York, I'll just Uber, right? So the new generation doesn't believe in fossil fuels. They don't necessarily believe in cars. So I see that we have to be vigilant. Elon Musk is my hero. And I'm not going to buy, you know, I have a car that gets me 37 miles to the gallon. And I drive consciously. I don't just go out to do this and then come back. I think about it, so I consume the least amount of. And I think that the price of electric cars at the low end will be the same as fossil fuel cars. In about 5 years. That's why I think that 70% of all cars on the highway will be electric, or 75, 80 around there, or hybrid, and that half of them will be autonomous automobiles. So we have to get there as we can.
Thank you. This young lady.
Yes, I've watched a lot of press conferences on television, so I have 2 questions, if I can slip them both in.
Sure.
One is, what do you see as the future post-democracy, post-capitalism? And the other was something I probably forgot, because I was getting
I'll start answering that, but you think of the second one, okay? I'm not sure we have to collectively decide that, but the idea is, so I went back and I read Wealth of Nations, you know, Adam Smith, and one of his foundation points is that scarcity creates value. Well, in a digital economy, there is no scarcity, there's infinity. There's infinite number of websites, infinite number of times of ebooks. There's no scarcity because it's not a physical product. So part of some of the tenets of the foundations of capitalism are no longer part of the reality today. Again, capitalism was initially shaped 225 years ago, right? and there aren't as many people and there aren't as many interconnectivities. So it will look much more inclusive, shared. The only way out of climate change is to redesign the consumer economy. So if you start working with that, then you'll see how capitalism has to move from growth to circular to spaceship. And that means we all have less stuff. We buy stuff not that we buy impulsively because some weird-looking person in New York says it's the latest fashion, but we define who we are. The number of thrift stores doubled in this country between 2008 and 2012. Things like that. So buy less stuff, consume less stuff. You will, any research, I've been talking about millennials for years, back when it was an initial issue in the workplace with baby boomers. They don't spend money as much as their older generations on stuff. They spend it on experiences. When you're on your deathbed, you have memories. You don't remember your things. So it will be a less thing economy. It will be more connected and sharing. We don't all have to have the same car sitting for 22 and a half hours a day next to each other, right?
But there will still be producers.
Yeah, but the producers of what?
Stuff, tablecloths.
Not necessarily in space. Only if the spaceship can sustain it.
Okay.
You know, and again, if somebody's, and probably these were made in China, right? So it's not an American issue necessarily. Second question, do you remember it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's how do we make other countries be as good as the United States as far as carbon emissions and pollution in general?
Well, you have it absolutely backwards.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Here's the problem with carbon emissions. After World War II, we won. We created the American way of life. Leave it to beaver, picket fences, car, all that. The American way of life. And because we're the world's greatest marketers, and because we disseminated our television all around the world, people grew up wanting the American way of life. America represents 4% of the population of the world and puts up 25% of the carbon. So we are the single worst country in the world per capita. So we have no right to say anything to anybody, okay? China is the largest greenhouse gas emitter, but on a per capita basis, they, at their level, would be one planet. Americans consume at a 5 planetary level. Wow. So shame on us. Everybody in Europe has every right to say, you people are screwing it up. The problem is we propagated the American way of life, and now that the lesser countries are starting to develop, we're saying, oh no, you can't have that stage that we had, because now we know it will kill us all or make our species go extinct. Well, who are you when you're with your indulgent lifestyle tell us anything? So we have it absolutely backwards in terms of carbon emissions. We are the worst. I mean, do you understand that? I mean, do you? And I'm asking the lady because you look like you're shaking your head.
Well, I think if you do a per capita for China with billions of people living out in the rice paddies, if you talked about cities and those people, it would seem more relevant. They're building more solar energy per capita per year by far than the United States.
Okay, let's.
So, I mean, there really is no place you can go in this conversation. America is the highest consumer and spewer of fossil fuel emissions. I always believe that if you're doing something really wrong, and you're trying to have other people do something right, do it right first. So, I mean, you're coming from way too much of an... America America must lead, because we are the worst. So we have to show that we can become the best. Until we show we can become the best, we don't tell. You know, I was in, gave a speech in Portugal last year, And while I was there, the headline in Portugal was for 98 hours, this country was completely run without fossil fuels because they have hydro, wind, and solar. Okay?
Wow.
So I wrote a column about that. Once something happened, it changes consciousness. The classic thing is the 4-minute mile. For 30 years, people said, man's never going to break 4 minutes in the mile. Roger Bannister in 1953, 3:59:59. In 2 years after that, 10 people broke the 4-minute mile because they thought it was possible, right? So Denmark, China, Germany, 25% of their energy comes from wind and solar. So we got to catch up. That's it. But we have to catch up. It's that simple.
And get out of denial. Here's the gentleman over here.
Hi, my name is Jeff Spees. I have a question unrelated to that particular issue.
Anything you want, as long as it's...
You spoke about how the world is so reliant on the communications that we've now established, and that's all satellite-based. Do you foresee...
It's not all satellite-based,
well,
but yeah.
but the majority of
Right.
communications
Right.
is. Do you foresee a problem with the world relying on satellites in the future?
Well, there's a revolution, just like Musk has reusable spaceships, there are companies that shoot up. In fact, he's invested one in one of his coming payloads is this, put up 400 satellites that are about the size of this glass that will last for 3 years and gradually fall down and burn up, right? It's very low cost, so it's constant, right? So part of the conceptual answer to your question is that everything is getting ever more decentralized, right? We're moving away from the grid to separated separated energy. Sorry. So we're not reliant on one thing. However, the reality is there wasn't cyber hacking until there was the internet, right? So the true reality is we're all at risk because we're all connected. So it's like life in general, right? When something really good happens, there's a potential downside to it, right? Sex is great, but you might get someone pregnant, right? That you don't want to, right? So we can connect, and grandma's 2 keystrokes away. Some of you must be grandparents who have grandchildren living somewhere else, and it's this connectivity that allows you to have constant interaction. But on the other hand, you could get hacked. So I believe that in the future, all wars will be online. The idea of boots on the ground is absolutely barbaric. Absolutely barbaric. Why should we put, I mean, don't start me on the endless, Middle East peace is an oxymoron. Name a time in history where there's peace in the Middle East. What are we doing? What are we doing, right? So, I mean, sorry for that, but am I answering your question? I get so in the moment with some of this stuff.
I recently saw a story about the debris that's circling
Oh, right, that's a big deal. That's a, yes, right. I think that, or that George Clooney movie, right? Whoever, that's a big problem. The simple statement on that comes from what I learned from Tim and the Spaceship Earth. There's 2 things that distinguish our species from any other on planet. We're the only one that creates waste, and we're the only species that can live anywhere on the planet. So as a consequence, we leave waste everywhere. We left waste on the moon. We leave waste in space until we solve the ability to think that doesn't matter. That's a real problem, no question. I don't know how to solve that other than go up and get it, right? And Musk will solve that because he'll be able to do it affordably.
Okay, question here on the right.
Yes, sir.
Yes, hi, my name is Tom,
Hi,
and
Tom.
I'm interested in the East, in China in particular.
The east part of China?
No, in the eastern part of the world,
Okay.
in China in particular.
Okay.
And thinking if you're 2037 coming
Right.
backwards or up
Right.
to 2037 with a sort of a more of a communal mindset and a hybrid form of, apparently a hybrid form of government with capitalism blended in with a autocratic type of a rule. What's your thoughts on that in relation to the Western mindset and the problems that
Right.
we face in the future is a competitive advantage for them or us?
Several just statements. Tom Friedman once wrote, it would be great if America could be China for a day so we could make all these decisions rather than go through this messy process that used to work that isn't. Second thing is China has a lot of problems. There are 1.35 billion people, which means there's still 1 billion in poverty, right? To your point about, so they've got a lot of problems. I wrote a column recently in Sarasota Herald Tribune. I published it in my blog. I republished it. Today's Wednesday, yesterday, and about the fact that sometime between now and 2020, there's going to be a significant financial disruption. Part of it is that China is like way over indebted, and they're very opaque. India is becoming the most polluted country in the world, and one of the ways that I think about it, if you can let me take a step back, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, are you aware of that? The bottom is survival, the top is self-actualization. I think that what is about to happen in the next 20 years with climate change and maybe some event in North Korea, maybe not, but wealth inequality increasing, that the nation states at some point in time will go, you may be Chinese, but I want to survive, and you want to survive, so we have to work together to solve this problem. That hasn't happened yet, right? I think the flu in 1917, 1918 killed 5% of the population. So 5% of the population now would be 375 million people. If 375 million people died in an epidemic in 6 months, I think there would be all kinds of multinational coordination, right? $10 billion of property was lost due to sea level rise in the world last year. That will be in America in about 5 years. So the impending consequences of what we have already done, I think, will allow an opening with enlightened leadership to bridge these gaps. That's an optimistic view, but nevertheless, what's the alternative other than
Chaos.
Mass starvation, mass killings, people fighting for water, food, and land, nuclear arms going off, the end of our species as we know it. There are 150 species a day that become extinct in this world due to our behavior as humans. Are we happy about that? So wait till we start dying in great amounts because we're playing the old legacy thinking games of nation state. So there's no question that the tilt of the balance of the world is going to Asia. I mean, Asia's got the most people. And counting Japan, it has the most wealth by far. So that was the problem post-World War, Cold War. We can't be everybody. We can't be the world's policeman. We can't think that we're on top of the world. We are just 315 million people of the 7.5 on this planet. We have to act that way with intelligence and openness. And right? Just keep running. You're obviously staying in shape. That's one of the things you should do, right?
Here's a question that one of our guests sent in when he registered. How will the evolution of the brain affect the future? We're learning more about how our brains are evolving from the effects of adverse childhood experiences to the use of technology to how we understand God.
Immense is the answer. You know, I think it's a true statement to say that every 10 years it has been and will continue to be a true statement that in the last 10 years we've learned more about the brain than we did in history before that, and that's continuing. One of the interesting side notes to that was that since nobody can figure out the motive of the Las Vegas killer, the coroner is waiting for for the death certificate to be signed, everything, so that they can go into the brain to see if it was a chemical disorder, because we can do that now, right? So coming back from that, how did we create computers? By thinking, mimicking our brain. So the more we learn about a brain, the more we'll be able to come up with different forms of computing and intelligence. And I think there's a very, relative to brain and religion, there was an interesting, somewhat humorous study that was done. Somebody can help me out who's a neuroscientist in the room. There's a part of the brain that gets stimulated when faith kicks in, when belief kicks in. In other words, when you walk, if you're a Catholic and you walk into a Catholic cathedral, what happens with your brain? It's the identical thing when somebody who is an Apple fanboy walks into an Apple store. So, that teaches us that we know how to manipulate people in deep-seated ways. There's some people for whom Apple is a religion, right? So I think the answer is immensely. In fact, that's why I call it the age of intelligence.
Relative to your comment about someday our brains being interfacing with our cell phones.
No, interfacing with each other.
I don't know if anybody is a legacy thinker like me who still reads the comics in the daily newspaper.
The comics says something about you, but we all read.
Today's
where's little Abner?
today's
where's
Dilbert comic strip
Okay.
has the two staff people,
whomever, right?
programming the pointy-haired boss to use his brain, to interact with his brain using their cell phones, and they're going to control him. That's how current you are with today's.
Okay, sorry, I
All right,
stepped
a
into your line
question
there.
over here, Michael. Who's got one?
There was a man here.
My name is Richard Peck. I'm a new resident of Seminole, a very happy resident of Seminole, and I'm so glad to find such a magnificent resource in St. Pete College here for all of us, and thank you, whoever has created it.
Thank you.
It seems to me that the most acutely critical issue for every citizen on this planet right this minute is the wars that continue in the Mideast over with the Muslims hiding behind jihad, hiding behind the religious part of it. It's terrorism. We in the West see these people as disruptors of our progress in the planet. We certainly understand how you feel about boots on the ground. Most of us probably feel the same way. Where's this going? What's going to happen with it? Who's going to win?
Well, what is define what winning a war means? I don't think that's ever been defined. Who's going to win? I don't understand what winning means. What's the definition of winning? And I'll tell you who's going to win.
Well, who continues as an organized culture, perhaps,
After World War II, Japan continued as an organized culture. Germany did that, so that one does. What I'm trying to say is there's no definition of winning a war. So if war is the answer, why has there been no peace? Okay?
Well, it's clearly not the answer.
Well, that's right. So the answer to me is I don't care about winning. Because if you can't define winning and I can't define winning, that means the people who are fighting it can't define winning because they tell us when we won, right?
Yep.
Okay. So winning a war is off the table. So the other reason is, why am I reading about, here's the problem I have, just to be dead honest. I'm sick and tired of being told that we have the greatest damn military in the history of the planet, and people who live in caves and have AK-47s in stolen pickup trucks are beating us. Okay? I don't get, there's something that's not right in that equation. And the second thing is, tell me whenever there's been peace in the Middle East. There has never been. So what do we think we can do? And why is it our job to police that anyway? Because, the thing that really got me going was a couple of years ago, there was all this. By the way, if you don't get the thread that you can't trust mainstream media, you're not listening to me, okay? So there was all this stuff I should say, a couple of years ago. But we can't blame all Islam for what's going on with ISIS. There's, 900 million moderate Islams. And snapshot, why are you having that conversation? Because every single global terrorist group in the world today cloaks themselves in Islam. Where are the Buddhist terrorist groups? Where are the Baptist terrorist groups? We're not sitting here going, well, most Baptists are moderate. I mean, what a dumb conversation. The question should be, every single moderate Islam has to stand up and explain to us why their religion births terrorists. I don't know the answer to that. But until I get the answer from moderate Islam, I, as a Westerner, can't do it. I just don't want to be involved. I mean, understand, 8 people died yesterday in New York, okay? 14 people got shot in New York with registered and unregistered guns. Think about what would have happened, and what happened with the Republican Party after Vegas. Well, we shouldn't talk about policy now. And the first thing that our president does last night after is he starts making, what if there had been a fundamental Islamic terrorist who had done the shooting in Vegas that killed more people than anything since 9/11? And it was an American who had 49 guns, and he bought 11 guns in a year. And that's not terrorism, but this is. If that had been in Islam, we'd be sending hundreds of thousands of troops over to the Middle East. I mean, it's all screwed up. I voted for Obama, right? So I get into a hotel late one night, and I miss the paper, and I'm on Twitter. Obama wins the Nobel Peace Prize Award. It was October 2009. My first reaction was, then he's not going to go into Afghanistan. How hypocritical would that be? Next month, 100,000 troops into Afghanistan. How can you accept the Nobel Peace Prize and send 100,000 people into battle, right? So my point is, I was a conscientious objector in Vietnam, okay? So, that was my choice. So I don't think war is the answer for anything. And the fact that this has gone on 16 years is unconscionable. I'm reading about Mosul every 3 years. I thought we retook Mosul 5 times already, right? What is this about? It's lunacy, period. Doesn't have anything to do about the future, except if we continue to do it, we'll destroy our country.
Thank you.
One more question. This is probably going to be the last one, and it's very short.
Hi, my name is Isaac. I'm a student here in SPC.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I have a question. What about the future of the currency? Is it going to be the same, or
No.
what do you think about the cryptocurrency and
Yeah.
Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin is just the first cryptocurrency. So Bitcoin doesn't eat cryptocurrency. What you really need to think about is blockchain, which you probably understand, right? Okay, so blockchain is a new method for open, transparent managing of ledgers. And there will always be a currency, because there'll always need to be something. There will always be cash. I don't believe it will all go electronic. For the point of view of, I'm just waiting for the day that all the ATMs go down for 24 hours in this country, right? Or 48 hours. What would happen to this economy? I mean, I have cash. I keep cash because I believe that the financial system's going to get hacked, okay? I don't have it all in cash, but I have enough to get by for several months, right? So you should too. So there will always be a currency. What the blockchain represents is transparency and decentralization. So that the blockchain and cryptocurrencies, if they have an immediate direct threat, it's on the big banks and the central banks, which is why Jamie Dimon came out and said, it's a hoax, right? Because it threatens the banking industry. So it's just the more continued disintermediation. It's the disintermediation of money, as the internet was the disintermediation of most everything else. It has a big future. I don't fully technically understand blockchain deeply, but the way to think about Bitcoin is to the future of cryptocurrency what, say, Pong was to the future of video games today. It's the first one. It is a bubble. People are frothing over it. I'm staying away from it, but that's because I'm close to retirement age, right? Okay, you're a student. Yeah, quick Yell out another one. It's all right.
So just you think that it's going to be the cryptocurrency and the other way it's going to be the gold, or
It's not either or. It's going to be all of the above.
What was the question? We couldn't.
The question was, is it going to be cryptocurrency or gold?
Oh.
One thing I'd like to say, whenever you're thinking about things, my personal point of view from research and from a lot of these interactions is that if you ever speak in terms of a duality, you're missing something. Good or bad, right or wrong, yin or yang. It is the human mind's attempt to bring structure to an infinite universe. So that if we right or wrong, makes it easy. So either or is also, so it will be all of the above. There'll be cash, there'll be electronic currency, there'll be cryptocurrency, there'll be gold, there'll be all of this. I don't know how it all is going to shake out in 20 years. It depends how safe we become with our connectivity or not. Okay?
Thank you.
This lady gets
Well,
one more. No, she doesn't?
All right, only because it's you.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I mean,
Can
you
we
know,
have
she
a
works for the
mic-
boss. I mean, we got to
Can
give
we have a
her.
microphone for Deborah, please?
Here you go.
Thank you. All right, I am just delighted that you've been here tonight. It's been so interesting, and I just have one quick question. If you were 20 years old and a student at St. Petersburg College, what would you study?
I would study design. I would study creative thinking. I would study whatever prepares me to think creatively, because that's what we need going forward in America. When you don't know what careers you are, taking a business is a short-term thing, taking a business course. Also coding. Coding, I was taking the educators to task last weekend. Coding is going to be automatically done by machines in 5 years, right? So this whole big thing about let's get girls to code, that's fine in the short term. And you can code to do your own website, stuff like that. I always get asked that question, what career? I don't know. But I think if I was 20 years old, I would prepare myself by lots of life experiences, lots of reading, lots of liberal arts education, and the reason I'm at the Ringling College of Art and Design is that we're in the golden age of design. Everything. Design is at the center of climate change and facing. We have to redesign or design our transportation, our energy. We have to redesign everything. There is nothing that's not going to be led by design thinking going forward.
Thank you very much. It's
You're
been
welcome.
great, very enlightening. Thank you.
Was this fun? Was this good?
Yes.
I had fun.
Thank you, Ms. Boyle, for reminding us of why we're here,
Right.
educating the next generation to deal with the future. As usual, I feel like
I'm the one that I'm sorry that I have to cut it short because I've really enjoyed this. And I like the nodding heads and smiling faces and the fact that most of you were really locked in when I was talking. So I appreciate the attention. A speaker can't be a speaker without an audience. So thank you.
I feel we could go on another hour, but he does have to rush out to Tampa International to catch a flight for his next presentation tomorrow in Chicago. Let's thank him once again and let him leave. He won't be able to linger for,
Thank you.
as we usually do.
Thank you. Thank you. Really.
I'll be with
Talk to you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
give that to Jonathan.
I will give it.
I hope you all will stay for 1 second, long enough for me to say thank you, to recognize the staff who helped put this on. Jonathan Sullivan and his team from IT on the visuals and the audio. Jacqueline and Chouette and Shantae Williams from my staff. And the Provost's office, Kyle Bell and his video team, and as always, our faithful volunteers. And let me just call your attention to our next dinner program, which you will not want to miss either. It's going to be as compelling, I think, as this one. It's January 25th in the new year. You have heard a lot about hate groups lately. This is about the hate groups, why people join them, and how they affect the people they hate, and what can be done. The speaker is someone who was a Nazi skinhead and got out of the movement and formed a a non-hate group called Life After Hate. You won't want to miss that. And then on December 6th, we're doing a second part of our series on Democracy 101 to help all of you better understand how you can do what the speaker said, which is get involved and make the change that we need to make a better world. That's all for tonight. Thank everyone for coming. Appreciate it.